Allison Hart, and I'm the CEO at the Gresham Area Chamber of Commerce, and I wanted to welcome you today to our Government Affairs Forum for September. Thank you all for being here. We're very pleased today to be learning about the Oregon Opportunity Program, which is Measure 86 on the upcoming November ballot, and our speaker today is Ted Wheeler, which I thank him very much for being here. This is the second time he's been here since my tenure at the Chamber, and we're really pleased to have him. The Measure 86 is a development of additional financial aid tools for Oregon students for post-secondary education, and this is to be done at a legislative level. And it's really to give new tools for students to get into post-secondary training programs, and that could be, university programs, it could be certification programs, it could be a whole variety of things, two-year colleges such as Mount Hood Community College and what have you. And so we're pleased to hear more about that today. We're also working in partnership with the East Metro Economic Alliance for the rest of our forums for this year, so I wanted to say thank you to Amy for that. I'd like to thank our sponsors, our presenting sponsor PGE and Riverview Community Bank, and also the Gresham Barlow School District, longtime supporters of the Chamber. I'd like to welcome our elected officials. We have Gresham City Councilor Lori Stegman. We have Gresham City Councilor Kirk French, and Ted Tostrud, our Fairview City Councilor, and Lori and Ted are Chamber liaisons for the Chamber, so thank you very much for your role there. I'd also like to welcome a whole variety of our board members today. We have Warner Allen, who is our Government Affairs Chair, so thank you, Warner. Christy Brewster is here, Mark Goldberg, Matt Miller, Yvonne Mills, Lynn Snodgrass, and John Mahoney. So thank you all for being here. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andre Wang, our fabulous moderator and facilitator.
Thank you, Allison. Good morning, everyone. Well, we're 42 days away from Election Day, and we have 7 statewide ballot measures that Oregonians will vote on. One of them is Measure 86, a referendum from the Oregon legislature. This will amend the state constitution to use the state's bonding capacity to create the Oregon Student Opportunity Fund that will create grants for college students. So for this particular issue, we're glad to have Oregon State Treasurer Ted Wheeler to discuss the merits and address the demerits of Measure 86. Mr. Wheeler has served as our state treasurer since 2010. Prior to that, as we all know, he served as chair of the Multnomah County Commission from 2006 to 2010. He holds his bachelor's in economics from Stanford, his MBA from Columbia, and a master's in public policy from Harvard. Now, there's a TV commercial by Dos Equis that touts the most interesting man in the world. I actually think that this was patterned after Ted Wheeler. He's a sixth-generation Oregonian, and the town of Wheeler in Hallam Bay was named after his great-grandfather. He once snowshoed to the North Pole with his wife, just because he wanted to go for a hike. He has twice completed the Kona, Hawaii triathlon because he felt like getting some exercise. And in 2002, he summited Mount Everest, probably just to check out the view. He doesn't always come to Gresham, but when he does, he addresses the Gresham Area Chamber of Commerce. Will you please welcome State Treasurer Ted Wheeler.
Well, thank you, Andre. That was by far the most interesting introduction I've ever had. The only explanation I want to give is I am still married to my lovely wife, and I cannot necessarily recommend going to the North Pole for your honeymoon. It sounded good at the time. It sounded interesting. But in practicality, going somewhere where it's 40 degrees below zero, where you're in a tent with 10 other people, and you're wearing 16 layers of clothing, and the sun is always up, is just not a very romantic experience. It was interesting, though. And also, you don't want to give a slideshow on that subject because, frankly, the landscape all looks the same. It looks like frozen. So, ballot measure 86, and I appreciate, first of all, you having me here. I think it's pretty tough, actually, to show up at 7:30 to listen to a state treasurer talk about anything. When it comes to this ballot measure, I wish I could tell you this is just a simple solution to a withering problem, but it's not. It's a fairly complex solution to a very complex problem, and one that, frankly, we have to have the fortitude to wrap our arms around and acknowledge candidly, and then talk about what the solutions are. Measure 86, at its core, is a workforce development strategy. It speaks to connecting young people in particular, not exclusively, but mostly young people, with the education and skills that we need to be competitive in a global economy. Ballot Measure 86 opens up opportunities for the state legislature to support student financial aid, those who want to go to Oregon universities or Oregon community colleges, and to further expand vocational and technical training opportunities at the community college level. There's 3 goals baked into Ballot Measure 86. The first, obviously, is to increase access to education and training. That access is particularly focused on lower income and middle class students, because we're talking about filling a need gap. The second goal is to reduce student debt, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail later. And third and finally, as Andre mentioned, it's to expand the opportunities for job training, to acknowledge the reality that not everybody in this state either wants or needs a 4-year university degree, but increasingly people need access to basic skills, job skills, and training, particularly in a skills-based economy. So Measure 86 basically is fundamental, in my view, to our future economic competitiveness. Why do this? Well, national studies confirm what local employers in the state of Oregon are already telling us, which is that with time, advanced education and job training is going to become more important than it is today in a skills-based economy. And I think that's why we're seeing strong support for Measure 86 from organizations like the Oregon Business Association and the Portland Business Alliance, the Main Street Alliance, and others. But of course, we're also seeing support from universities, community colleges, and important community institutions like the Oregon PTA and the Oregon League of Women Voters. Why do we need Ballot Measure 86? Okay, we accept that advanced education and training is important. You guys are in the business sector, you get that. Why do we need to do it? Well, the reason we need to do it is because Oregon, quite frankly, is moving in the wrong direction. When it comes to supporting advanced education, Oregon is near the bottom of the list. I think you've all read a long laundry list of not very happy statistics about the state of higher education in Oregon. I believe we are 47th in terms of our funding of higher education on a per capita basis. By funding, I mean state-supported funding of our state institutions. The consequence of that is that Oregon students pay very high prices to participate in advanced education in the state of Oregon. In fact, in a recent 8-year period, the price paid by students and their families to attend Oregon universities has increased 50%. 50% in a recent 8-year period. Household income only grew 20% during that same time period. Well, a smart economist might say, well, it really doesn't matter what the price is. That's your supply side. But there's student aid. So not everybody's getting washed out. Not everybody's being left behind. Well, that's true, except we're not only a high-price state, we're a low student aid state. How low is it? We are at 1/3 the national average when it comes to funding student financial aid in the state of Oregon. What does that mean in a real sense? Well, we support student financial aid at about $50 million per biennium in the state of Oregon. It is so rare, student financial aid, that for every 5 students in the state of Oregon who are qualified based on financial need and bother to apply to get that student financial aid, only 1 out of 5 get anything. And because the funding for student financial aid is so variable, even if you win that lottery and you're the lucky 1 out of 5 who gets that student financial aid, there's no guarantee you get it beyond that 1 year. I mean, you in the business community, you know, anathema to business development is uncertainty. The same is true for a household trying to figure out its own economics and plan for the future. How can you do that if you get student financial aid 1 year, but you don't even know if you're going to have it come the fall for another year? And what we've heard from a lot of students are some really bad stories about students who make 2 choices. The worst choice is they drop out. They decide, okay, I don't want to incur the debt. I can't incur the debt. I can't work anymore. I have to take care of my kids at home or whatever. I'm out. That's the worst option. And for those who stay in, there's a cost to all of us too, because they probably take on additional work responsibilities outside of college, and that requires them to take longer to be in the institution, which means there's less room for other people who might want to be there. When it comes to vocational and technical training in the state of Oregon, the story's even worse. We as a state made a conscious decision a number of decades ago to start defunding vocational and technical arts in the high schools. In fact, we gutted those programs. There were some districts, I'm glad to say, I'm standing in one, that have worked very hard to restore those programs. But it's far and few between that that's happening, and we're rebuilding that capacity at far too slow a pace. The result is too many people, particularly lower income and middle class students, are being shut out of the advanced education and training that our employers are telling us our young people need to be connected to the jobs that exist today and are expected to exist in the years ahead. The fundamental belief that all of us in this coalition who support Measure 86 believe is that everyone in this state should at least have a shot at gaining access to those education and skills. I want to talk just briefly here about the vocational and technical training piece, because people say, well, what do you mean by that? And wouldn't it cost a fortune to reintroduce vocational and technical training into our high schools? The answer is yes. If we keep thinking about education and training the way we've always thought about it, it's going to be far too expensive. We're a resource-constrained state. We don't have a lot of money. We don't raise a lot of taxes relative to other states, particularly given our needs. So what other opportunities exist out there? One opportunity is to leverage partnerships in a way that we've never leveraged them before. There are some great examples of community colleges working with private sector partners and reaching into high schools to help give young people access to very valuable vocational skills. I'll give you one example. I could give you several, but I'll give you one example. There's a great program down at Lynn Benton Community College. You all know where that is, down by Albany. Great community college. They were curious, the people who run that institution, as to why they didn't get more students coming from Lebanon High School right across the highway. And so they reached out to to high school counselors, to some of the administrators, teachers there, some of the students, and just said, hey, what gives? Why aren't young people coming to our community college? And what they found out, to be frank, is there just wasn't a culture of college attendance in Lebanon. Lebanon happens to be one of those communities in Oregon that used to be highly dependent on timber manufacturing. There was a mill there, and young people for generations could go right from the high school into the mill. Or the mill supported a number of good businesses in the immediate vicinity. Young people could go to work for those businesses. They didn't really need skills beyond that. The mill disappeared and everything changed, but the culture really didn't change. So there wasn't this idea of young people going to college. And those who did choose to go to Lynn Benton Community College were very often the very first people in their family to attend college. So they started brainstorming, the college, the high school, and some other people in the community, undoubtedly business leaders, and they started saying, how can we reinvent job training in this community? And they came up with what I think is nothing short of a brilliant solution. They created the state's first advanced transportation technology training center. It's in a field as you drive into Lebanon. Young people from the high school are eligible to participate. They're getting college credits. They might not even know that they're attending college, but in reality, now they're attending college. And the best thing about it from the perspective of the young people is they're doing something that excites them. They are learning to work with their hands. They're learning to work with their heads. They're learning how to be diesel technology specialists. That is a skill that is in huge demand in agriculture, in industrial manufacturing, and other applications. And they also created a training program around alternative fuel diagnostics. That basically means if somebody in Portland buys a Prius and it needs servicing, you don't just pop open the hood anymore and tweak the engine. You actually connect it to a diagnostic piece of equipment. And those applications are now spreading rapidly all across the planet in a whole host of different capacities. And they're training young people right here in Oregon, in Lebanon, how to be those diagnostic technicians. Very high wage, high skilled job in high demand. Employers here like Toyota are looking for people like that. The best thing about it is they have a number of private sector partners. So the cost to operate the facility are largely incurred by the private sector partners who have a vested economic interest in seeing that program succeed and in seeing young people gain access to those skills. It's leveraging the partnership, not relying just on the old school method of increasing taxes so we can expect to pay for it. Because frankly, if it comes down to a competition for tax dollars, vocational training has already been proven to be a loser in this state. Student financial aid has already been proven to be a loser in this state. Now I want to get to the controversial part, because I see a lot of head nodding. There really wasn't anything I've said that anybody could rationally disagree with yet. So let's get right to the meat of the bones. What is it about Measure 86 that concerns people? Ballot Measure 86, as I said right up front, gives the legislature tools that they do not currently have access to increase funding for student aid and vocational and technical training programs. Specifically, it takes us outside the box a bit. It gives the legislature the opportunity to create an endowment, a permanent, growing, locked endowment that with time will grow. As the world economy grows, this endowment, which will be a risk-managed, diversified portfolio, will grow with time, and some portion of the earnings could be spun off to help support student financial aid. In other words, to take all that fancy schmancy talk and boil it down, we're taking advantage of the growth of markets. We're taking advantage of the magic of compound earnings, something which state government really doesn't do. Governments tend to make a budget in a particular biennium to support whatever their priorities are at that given time and date, and they really don't think about the long term. Government really isn't in the business of funding long-term priorities. Endowments, of course, are created for exactly that purpose. And that's why institutions like Harvard or MIT or Stanford all have them for their students. We're suggesting, why don't we do the same thing here for our students? Leverage a little bit of tax resource with a lot of long-term compound earnings. But let's not stop there. Let's also open the door to philanthropic contributions. There's a lot of people and institutions in this state who understand the economic growth imperative, and they want to help participate. We had great conversations, for example, with the Oregon Community Foundation. And they said, why are we always relying on tax dollars for these things? It's in everybody's benefit to have a robust economy. Why don't we see if we can also generate support in the philanthropic and civic-minded community to help support this very important economic objective? So we wrote it into the ballot measure that the endowment can also accept resources from civic-minded institutions and individuals. And last but not least, and here's the part where people hit the roof, we opened up other funding tools because you have to seed the endowment. You could use direct appropriations, but And that would be the cheapest way to do it. Just prioritize it in the state budget and put some amount of funding into the endowment. But I just have too much history to understand that in any given short-term biennium, K through 12 education is always going to win out. And there will never be enough resource for K through 12 education. So when we get to the end of the budget cycle, there will not be any direct appropriation left for student financial aid or vocational and technical training. It doesn't mean it's not important or fundamental to our future economic competitiveness. It just means the resources run out before you get to that point on the list. And so we started saying, well, what's the next best resource? And I would argue, and smart people disagree with me, but I would argue the next best resource after appropriations is a limited, prudent sliver of general obligation bonding capacity, at least insofar as interest rates remain low. If interest rates start going up, it's off the table. It wouldn't make sense anymore. And I wish we'd done this when we could get this below 2% on the financing charges, but we didn't. We're still talking about it. So it opens the door to an endowment, to philanthropic contributions, to using a small sliver of general obligation bonds either independently or in combination with direct appropriations to help create a permanent and lasting endowment. Over time, 20, 30 years, this endowment, if we stick to it, could be a permanent competitive advantage for the state of Oregon. And as a state that concerns itself with things like wealth generation and per capita wage growth relative to the rest of the country and increasing pockets of poverty, particularly in rural communities where we've never answered the question of how do we transfer from a natural resources economy to a higher skill, higher wage economy. This, I believe, and my colleagues who support us, we think it's an important part of the answer. I'm going to close with this. There's been a lot of discussion about, is this too risky? I don't believe it is. And I'm sure when we get to the questions and answers, I'll be pressed on that, and I'd be delighted to be pressed on that, frankly. I think it's important we do it. But I can't think of anything we've ever done as a nation or as a state where there wasn't some cost incurred or some investment made or some level of risk incurred. I think of John F. Kennedy and what reaction he might get today in this view of the world and this view of government if he said, hey, I've got this great idea. Let's spend tens of billions of dollars, which, by the way, was a lot of money back then, is today, and let's, over a period of many years, spend it to build a spaceship to send people to the moon. He'd be laughed out of the White House, right? He'd be laughed out of the White House. But at that time, when he made those recommendations, people didn't laugh. It inspired them because they saw an opportunity to move to a higher plane. And there were other geopolitical issues that were very important to people at the time that provided a context of support for that. But I think about all the other things we did. We built a transcontinental railroad, we built highways, we electrified rural communities across this country, we created safety net programs like Social Security, and maybe most radical of all, we decided let's ensure that all citizens of the United States have access to an education, a public education, regardless of gender, regardless of ethnicity, race, religious viewpoint, and regardless of income. And we did it. And those are still the things we fall back on as being most meaningful. Why do I paint this big picture? Because all we're talking about here is an endowment. An endowment. And issuing bonds as one possible source of funding that endowment. We issue bonds all day long for a variety of projects that if they were vetted as seriously as this is being vetted and deserves to be vetted, you would probably think this was a much better play. So I'll stop there. I thank you for your forbearance. It's a thick subject for 7:30 in the morning, but it's an important subject, and I hope you and your families will take this information and think about it as ballot measure 86 comes before you on your ballot. Thanks all.
Well, before we open the floor to your questions, so we have one question from the Government Affairs Council, and actually it goes to that risk versus reward question. Sure. So the Oregonian came out with their editorial not supporting the ballot measure, precisely on the notion that this is creating an endowment on a credit card, as they put it. But and one idea that they had is, shouldn't the colleges in the state shoulder the responsibility for raising the endowment's initial stake? What are your thoughts on that?
I have two thoughts. First of all, the Oregonian got it wrong. Their headline, I didn't say that. I may have thought it, I didn't say it. This is not a blank check. And they wrote their editorial with the assumption that this, I believe they called it a blank check for the legislature and community colleges. And if that's what this was, I would also vote against it. And I would also editorialize against it. It's not. When we're talking, and I'll take appropriations off the table. I don't think anybody thinks that's too radical. Let's talk about it in the most expensive terms, bonding capacity. In order to either create the endowment or to issue bonds in support of Measure 86, the legislature still has to prioritize the creation of the endowment against other competing priorities. And if they use bonds as one means to support the endowment, they still have to prioritize the issuance of bonds against other competing bonding proposals. And all of those proposals collectively still have to remain underneath the state's very conservative bond issuance cap. So it's not a blank check. Ballot Measure 86 gives the legislature legal options they don't currently have. It incurs no costs. It issues no bonds. It does not direct the legislature to do anything. It opens up the opportunity for them to do so. So I would simply argue that with all due respect to the editorial board, they got it wrong. Now, with regard to their recommendation, let's not do this. Let's just ask community colleges if they would be happy to support all of this on their own. Community colleges already do support this all on their own. And that's part of the problem, because most community colleges aren't exactly deep-pocketed institutions. I would invite you all to take a walk through Mount Hood Community College someday to see what I'm talking about. But what we could do, if we wanted to, we could use some of this endowment to help incite or incentivize is probably a better word, incentivize private sector contributions. I could see a matching program where the state kicks in 25 cents for every dollar that Mount Hood Community College raises for student financial aid. I'm not opposed to that. I'm all for using a little bit of public resource to incentivize a lot of private sector and philanthropic resource for something that's clearly in the public good.
Questions? Please identify your name and your business, please.
Hello, I'm Marguerite Troopman. I'm a
Hi,
real
Margaret.
estate broker.
Thank you.
As a fiscal conservative, this is more of a comment than
Sure.
a question. I think you'd get more support for the program if it's a requirement that the students actually go to a 2-year community college for the first 2 years and then go on to a 4-year institution. I could have sent my kids to Harvard, but I sent one of my daughters to Mount Hood Community College for the nursing program.
Very good.
No student debt. So if it's good enough for me, it's good enough for them. And I think you'll get more support from the, from the general public if you know that you're spending the dollars wisely.
So as a fiscal conservative to whatever I am supposed to be, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. And more importantly, you know who else agrees with you? We have a strong coalition of students who are supporting Measure 86 who also agree with you. When we had our conversations around the state. And interestingly, I'm thinking of a roundtable we had in Bend at Central Oregon Community College, where it's also a health technology related program, another good one, like Mount Hood Community College. Nothing made those students angrier than knowing that one student out of the 5 who got the student financial aid and then used it unwisely. By that I mean either didn't show up for classes, didn't apply themselves, or didn't finish the program. When it comes to the cost of college, I've been out there on the pointy edge saying there is more that our university and community college system can do to reduce costs. They could use technology more than they have, for example. And yes, families should also bear responsibility in terms of being fiscally smart about how to take advantage of educational and training opportunities that are out there without looking for the platinum solution. We don't need a platinum solution. And in fact, I applaud what you and your family did, because that frankly frees up resources for everybody else who wants to be able to do the same thing. So I applaud you. However, Ballot Measure 86 does not speak to how the resources are spent. Ballot Measure 86 is a funding mechanism and provides funding tools to the legislature. That's narrowly what it is. But the beauty of it is it's opened up a dialogue around whether or not student aid in the state of Oregon should be reformed. And there's a lot of great positive conversations taking place. One is around accountability. You know, there are states out there that took their grant programs and turned them into forgivable loan programs, so that if you don't meet certain benchmarks and waypoints and criteria, you know, like showing up for class, it stops being a grant, it becomes a loan. It has a very strong incentivizing impact on young people. Other ideas, there's questions about, do we prioritize science, technology, engineering, and math, STEM? That's being discussed as one possible element of a student aid package. And then there's a whole other list of ideas that are currently being considered in terms of how we would spend increased student financial aid if Measure 86 passed. But I got to tell you this, Oregon has been full of great ideas around how we could expand or change student financial aid, and they've all failed. They've all failed because they've never spoken to how do you pay for it all. Ballot Measure 86 is the only idea out there today that speaks to funding. You've heard of pay it forward, you've heard of the first 2 years free, you've heard of other ideas that will undoubtedly percolate up through this legislative session. 86 is fundamental to all of it because it's the only one that talks about how do you fund it. So thank you for your question. I don't disagree with you at all.
So while I'm making my way over there, one topic that's come up in this discussion is a question came up, isn't that what lottery dollars were intended and dedicated for, was to address funding education as a funding mechanism?
Now you got me going. Now you got me going. Yeah, I just participated in another editorial board meeting where their solution, their easy solution, is why not just have all the lottery dollars go to student financial aid the way they did it in Georgia. Many of you probably have heard of the HOPE grant, the HOPE scholarship program that Georgia established. It's sort of the gold standard. The answer is because they were more thoughtful than we were. They created a lottery program to fund their workforce development and student aid strategy. In other words, to be blunt, they had a plan. They had an economic development plan, and workforce development was integral to that plan. Connecting young people with education and skills was always part of the game. And then they started saying, well, how do we fund it? They did a Ted Wheeler. What's our mechanism for funding it? And they landed on lottery. Great solution. In Oregon, we did it the reverse way. We said, well, gee, there's this new funding mechanism out there called a lottery, and they're doing it in Massachusetts, and they're doing it here, and they're doing it there. We should do that too. So we created a lottery. And then we opened the door to, okay, so how do we spend all this money that we just created? Or 16 or 18 different uses for lottery dollars. Good luck prying those out of the lottery stream. Good luck, because there have been legislative every one of those streams of funding. A lot of them are things that, frankly, people in this room would really like and support. There's important economic development, resources embedded in our lottery stream, and all of those streams of funding going through the lottery have deep community coalitions of support. You're never going to be able to pry those out of the lottery stream. And on top of it all, lottery resources are diminishing with time. They're not expanding, they're declining, which, you know, good news, bad news. I guess less people are gambling or spending less. That's probably a positive. Bad news is there's less money coming through the lottery. So the lottery's really been cooked as an option to fund student financial aid, unless you blew up the whole program. And if you think Measure 86 is a tough political climb, blowing up and reallocating the lottery resources, I would say you might as well get Kennedy in here to propose we fly all the way to the next galaxy. It's a reach too far.
Kathy Clevenger, Microchip Technology.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi. Just a question to clarification on the measure. So the legislature could create this endowment and they could fund it through direct appropriations.
They could.
Measure 86 isn't required to do that, is
No,
that correct?
that's
Okay,
correct.
So it's just the bonding mechanism.
Gives them tools.
And then the bond will be paid from the general fund. So the principal and interest is paid from the general fund, and then the money that comes from the bond, the proceeds. What happens if the fund doesn't make money?
So let's assume worst case scenario, Kathy. Worst case scenario that I can come up with. The state issues the bonds. The bonds are then some portion, well, actually all the bonds that you issue for that purpose go into the endowment along with whatever else. Let's assume there's nothing else. Let's assume it's just the bonds. We just issue bonds. We put it in the endowment. And 3 years later, the treasurer, with graft, corruption, greed, steals every cent of the money. Or there's a global economic catastrophe and has zero value. It's completely wiped out. The total cost to taxpayers of that fiasco would be the cost of issuing and servicing the bonds. You've lost the entire value of the bonds. In other words, another way to put this is the risk associated with issuing bonds to fund an endowment is exactly the same risk as issuing bonds to build a building. There are, in fact, examples of capital construction projects where the cost to taxpayers has actually exceeded or will exceed the total cost of issuing and servicing the bonds. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a jail, the name of which I never mention, that was built through the issuance of bonds. It's never been used because the resources to fund it evaporated when we as a state moved in a different direction in terms of taxes, and the demand for the facility declined. Yet, it's a capital construction project that requires ongoing maintenance and upgrades. It's a depreciating asset, unlike the endowment, which I expect to be an appreciating asset. There's a highway sliding down a mountainside near the Oregon coast, complete wipeout. There was a city hall built in the city of Salem that had serious construction defects. It's in the process. I guess they're actually done with it now, upgrading it and rebuilding it. There's a medium security prison facility called Deer Ridge that was built using $200 million of taxpayer money. It's never been opened and probably never will be. Yet there's ongoing maintenance and operating costs associated with that. So the risk to taxpayers in seeding an endowment is exactly the same risk as issuing bonds for other purpose. Once you're in the business of the endowment, that's a question of how do you manage a diversified risk-managed portfolio. And I've run some numbers for you because rather than talking about the risk, let's talk about the reality. Let's assume that we could issue taxable callable bonds at 4%, which is actually a good assumption. If we issued them today, we'd be issuing for a lot less than that. But let's just say 4%. And let's say that our performance in the endowment was exactly the same performance we've had over the last 30 years in our largest endowment, which is, of course, the PERS fund. The public, not the entire pension system, but the fund that supports the pension system. It's a risk-managed, diversified, professionally managed portfolio. If we had invested $100 million in bonds, the most expensive strategy at 4% 30 years ago, real numbers, these are real numbers now, the endowment today would be worth $474 million. It would have spun off an additional $351 million in student aid, and it would have cost $173 million. So a 4-to-1 netting out the costs. If we'd put in $500 million, we'd gone big and taken a third of our total total general obligation bonding capacity for one biennium. The endowment today would be worth $2.5 billion. It would have spit out $1.7 billion in additional financial aid and workforce development resources at a cost of about $867 million. That's 5 recessionary cycles and a global economic collapse included in those numbers. And that's why, while there is risk involved, and there are costs incurred, and we are making a long-term commitment, a long-term investment, I actually feel pretty good about the level of risk we would be taking, particularly given that I know how important the use would be.
Hi, Brian Lessler, PDG Construction Services, local
Thank you,
general contractor.
Thank you.
You make some very compelling arguments about this and the economics of it. What concerns me, and my question is, what stopgaps are there as we go forward? Let's say 86 passes. All that does is give the legislature the ability to write legislature that says we're going to pass these bonds. What stopgaps are there for limitations on the use of those funds? I mean, how do we assure ourselves that all of a sudden it doesn't become like the lottery where a whole bunch of people say, we got this big pot of money, let's spend a little bit over here in the name of education, a little bit over here in the name of education. It reminds me a little bit of the honorable representative from down south that says we've got to pass this so we can find out what's in it.
Fair enough. So there's 2 stopgaps in particular. The first is the language of the ballot measure itself is restrictive in terms of the uses. Student financial aid and vocational and technical training programs specifically at the community college level. That doesn't prevent them from reaching into high schools, of course, but the funding would go through the community college system in this particular case. There's another stopgap that I think is probably the more meaningful one, which is that the legislature can't actually issue bonds or incur costs without getting it through a legislative process, which is an open and public process. So if somebody comes in with a batty idea that's not related to the core of the ballot measure itself, it's going to get shot down through that public process. That's not to say that bad decisions couldn't be made. We make bad decisions around bonding all the time. And there's nothing to prevent that in a democratic society with our form of government other than public scrutiny and people watchdogging it. So I can't sit here and tell you honestly with a straight face that there's no risk associated with it as you've described, but I think we've been pretty diligent in terms of how we drafted it to put specific sideboards around it. Yes, sir.
What are you laughing about? Ted, if you were governor, what parameters would you put to further ensure that the dollars were used appropriately? You mentioned some that other states have put into place. If you were governor, what would you do? If
I were governor and as governor actually had the authority to stipulate, and the governor actually doesn't, you'd really have to be emperor because it belongs to the legislative process. But let's say I was emperor. I would increase the accountability mechanism. I would connect it to reduced costs at the community college and the university level. I would require more thoughtfulness in terms of how technology in particular was used in the university system. I am very attracted to the idea of a forgivable loan as opposed to a direct grant, just because I think it keeps the accountability piece there. It still gives people access who need it and are serious about it. But if young people know that it's a forgivable loan and that they have performance goals that they have to meet, some who maybe aren't as serious about their education as others may opt out and decide to do something else, which is okay if you're talking about a public strategy. Those are the core requirements I would have. Beyond that, I would defer to educational experts and business leaders in terms of where they think the biggest bang for the buck is. I, as governor or as emperor, would not get into the business of saying, well, I really want to support software development programs, but not nursing or technology. I don't think I would ever want a governor making those decisions. I'd want people who know the economy and understand it making those kinds of decisions. Yes?
So when you went to the editorial board, did you call yourself the emperor?
No.
Okay,
I was very
just checking.
assiduously avoiding using that particular language. Nor did I use the term governor either. I'm just a lowly state treasurer, very happy to humbly serve.
Ted, I'm Lila Leathers.
Yes, good to see you again, Lila. How are you doing?
Thank you. Nice to see you too. My question would be, why don't we focus more on the high schools and put our technology training in there? I have a friend whose daughter skipped her last 2 years of high school, went to the community college here in Gresham, and came out with 2 years of college at the same time that her peers came out with a high school education. She's now on to nursing school with a big jump. And another thing, the Benson High School has always been well known as a wonderful technical school. And it's my understanding there are many, many students lined up to get into that school, and they
Correct.
can't because they haven't even opened it up to the full capacity that they're allowed. So that would be my thought. Let's start with the high schools because we have a lot of students that are dropping out, and I think they need the help more really than a lot of other people that we're jumping in to help.
So, Lila, in direct response, first let me say you are correct. However, Measure 86 does allow us to create these partnerships that do reach into the high schools. But in terms of actual high school-based programming, you are also correct that that should be a priority. The legislature did pass legislation, I think 4 years ago, it may have been 6 years ago now, Lila, to start reintegrating vocational arts into the high schools, but it's happening very slowly. And so from my perspective, I'm seeing 86 focusing on higher education as being an opportunity to speed that process along by leveraging the community college resources in communities where there are high schools where they can also develop these partnerships jointly. Columbia Gorge Community College, COCC, Clackamas Community College, Lynn Benton that I mentioned earlier, all of them have vocational and technical training programs that also serve their high school programs. They're just not based at the high school. They have separate facilities, and high school kids are getting college credit, as you say. So it's hugely important. Getting back to the if I were emperor, I'm here talking about 86, which is higher education and workforce. I actually believe the number one issue confronting our state and confronting policymakers and business leaders is our egregiously high dropout rate. That is the nut to crack. We're second highest in the nation in terms of non-completion from high school. That has huge implications for workforce development, wealth generation, poverty, tax base, and it should be our highest priority, and it's something I talk about a lot. But in the context of Measure 86, this is a separate deal that's also important to workforce development. 86 does not solve all of the economic ills of the state of Oregon. It does not address all of the higher education or even all of the workforce development issues. It's just one tool, one small piece of it. So your point's well taken, Lila.
My name's Karen Johnston, and I own All About Automotive. So vocational training, technical training is close to what I do. What I'm not hearing, and I guess what my question is, and probably similar to Brian here, is a plan. I'm hearing funding. Measure 86 is for funding. But I'd like to see a plan in place for what that funding is going to do, like talked about by everyone really here a little bit, because what I'm seeing is the kids that go to college aren't prepared for college, so therefore they're dropping out of college. And these are kids that are at the top of their classes. So, you know, that funding needs to, I think, be planned out ahead of time so it's not like lottery dollars that, hey, here's money, what are we going to do with it? We make a true plan ahead of time.
So the plan today is that if 86 passes, it will directly connect to the Oregon Opportunity Grant Program today. The Oregon Opportunity Grant Program is a grant program straight out based on financial need. There's very specific parameters that are established in Oregon statute, and it will expand funding around the Oregon Opportunity Grant to increase access to higher education and job training. That's the plan. In my opinion, it's an insufficient plan. And so the Higher Education Coordination Commission, which was created by the legislature, and other legislative committees are now looking at reforms to student financial aid in the event that Measure 86 passes. From a logic flow perspective, I'm sort of with you. It would have been better to say, if you pass Measure 86, here's our new reformed, revised workforce development strategy, and here's how it connects with our overall business strategy. Unfortunately, that's a perfect world and one in which I don't live in. The legislature, in order to refer this ballot measure to the ballot, made it very clear that they wanted 86 passed before they spend the time and energy and impanel committees and ask citizens to participate in a lengthy and thoughtful process about student aid. They wanted to know 86 would pass before they wasted their time, in other words, on that process. I'm with you, but that's not always how politics works. So this is sort of the next best strategy. I'm actually pretty confident that the right people down in Salem, the co-chairs of the education committees, people on both sides of the aisle who support this, the Higher Education Coordination Commission and the governor who obviously supports this, I am convinced that they are serious about wanting to take a deeper look at this. My assumption is they will continue to work with universities, community colleges, and employers, and I hope they'll also reach out to smaller employers as they shape these programs, but that has not happened yet. And ballot measure 86 does not speak to it, and I have to be honest about it. By the way, as a state, we also need more of a plan, a business development plan, a strategy. But that's a different speech for a different day.
Good morning, Warner Allen. I'm an attorney here in Portland.
Good morning, sir.
One of the things that I've heard in connection with 86 is that the cost of post-secondary education has risen dramatically, as you commented, at least in part because of the abundance of student loans that are available for students to borrow money, and therefore there isn't really a cost containment factor in higher education. And I'm wondering whether you agree with that analysis or not, and if so, if 86 passes and this new funding ability is there, what restrictions are there going to be in the increased cost of education, far outstripping the cost of living?
Fair enough. First of all, what you're referring to is called the Bennett hypothesis. William Bennett, when he was the Secretary of Education, had a hypothesis, just as you've correctly outlined, that if student aid was increased, institutions of higher education would simply increase their tuition and fees and gobble it all up and not help anybody. That hypothesis has been resoundingly shot down. The hypothesis holds no water And there have been a number of studies, the most recent one about 3 years ago, because it came up again in the debate around student financial aid at the federal level. They actually targeted it against Pell Grants, they didn't look at the state level in Oregon. And I'll get to that in a minute. But they looked at the national level. As Pell Grants went up, the cost of higher education paid by students went up. As Pell Grants went down, the cost of higher education is paid by students went up. I mean, it seems like it goes one direction. Nationally, I think the problem isn't around financial aid. I think it's around student services. There's sort of this nuclear arms race going on around institutions trying to attract, ironically, the best students. There was an article in yesterday's New York Times. I don't know if anybody caught it. It makes you laugh. It makes you cry. Universities around the country are actually building lazy rivers and water parks. I'm not kidding you. I'm not making this up. And all of those things contribute to the bottom line cost of higher education nationally. So taking all of that knowledge around student services and then looking at the state of Oregon, we did some research, and it's still on the Treasury website. We've put it out there now for 1.5 years for people to look at and criticize. Nobody has. The cost of higher education in Oregon, I'm about to say something really unpopular. The cost of higher education in Oregon, the price that students pay, the cost actually, I'm sorry, I learned that mannerism from my 8-year-old daughter. The cost per student of educating somebody in Oregon's higher education institutions has actually gone up at a pace commensurate with inflation. In other words, they've done a pretty good job of holding the line. The reason the price paid by students and their families has gone up so dramatically is because the legislature has reduced its support of higher education. And nearly on a dollar for dollar basis, as the legislature has decreased its general fund support for higher education, there has been a cost shift by those institutions on the backs of students and their families that is slowly ratcheted up over time. So the hypothesis that increasing student aid will dramatically or even marginally increase student prices has been disproven. Moreover, getting to the second part of your question, now, if I were a good politician, I would dodge it, but I'm not going to because I think it's an important point. Ballot Measure 86 does nothing to control the cost of education in Oregon, and that is something we should all be relentless about. I think individual boards do a pretty good job of it. I know Mount Hood Community College is operating on a shoestring, and there's others that I think are equally relentless about keeping costs low, but as I say, there are other things that they have not done effectively. Let me give you 2 examples. Number one, technology. Anybody in here who has access to an iPhone or a smartphone has access to some of the greatest universities in the world, some of the best lecturers, and you don't have to pay a dime for it. The days of a 750 student lecture hall for Psych 101, those days are gone. You don't need to bring students together to hear a big lecture. You can do it online. And it's already being done effectively all across the country and around the globe. And institutions of higher learning have been very slow to adopt those new technologies. It's a game changer for them, and it's sort of an uncomfortable one, but they must do that. The second area, and we could do this around student financial aid actually, Alabama made its student financial aid available on basically a tiered basis. The more time it takes you to get out of the institution, the less student aid you get. Right? And what they're trying to do is they're trying to head off other bonding requests. You'll hear from people, some people say, well, I don't want to support this because it might crowd out the demand, the bonding available for new dormitories to increase capacity. Well, Alabama sort of got smart, and they said, well, hey, this is a factory problem. This is an operations flow problem. You can either increase capacity by investing in infrastructure, or you can increase capacity by speeding up the throughput through your factory. And I hate to talk about education as a factory, but it works in this particular case. And so they gave students an incentive to really buckle down, study, take fewer jobs, have fewer extracurriculars, get in and get the heck out, and free that seat up for somebody else. And it's been very effective in Alabama. So that's another way we could do it. Yes, sir.
Hi, Treasurer Wheeler. I'm Mark Goldberg. I'm the Dean of Workforce Development at Mount Hood Community College. And I think I can say, to the best of my knowledge, we're not building a lazy river at the college. But I would like to add, since you talked about some examples of other colleges and partnerships with high school, that we've been running a Running Start program for high school kids in our machine tool technology program, so that they do get college credits while they're in high school, and do a lot with dual credit, sitting with Superintendent of Reynolds, Linda Florence, and looking at using federal Perkins dollars for both the high school and post-secondary career and technical education programs. I think the question I have about 86 is looking at not just high school kids as the pipeline and the future of our workforce, but also recognizing, at least at Mount Hood Community College, the average age of our students is 31. And looking at the demographics in East Multnomah County and seeing that we have the lowest percent of adults without a post-secondary degree in the whole metro area. So how do lower skilled adults access the resources with 86?
Same way.
Okay. So
And I'm glad you spoke to Mount Hood Community College. I wasn't as familiar with the program, and I dared not speak to it in front of a very knowledgeable audience of people right down the street. So I appreciate your bringing that up, and that's another good example we can talk about. Thank you. Yeah, people retooling is very important, and we've certainly seen that happen in this recession, where people are upping their skills or changing their skills. And we're going to see more older adults also coming into the community college system in the years ahead. So this isn't, while I talk about young people, that's probably not exactly right, although they're really foremost in my mind at this particular moment. The reality is lots of people need access to that education and skills training.
After every proceeding, the lawyer is entitled to give their closing argument. So if you want to give your closing statements and kind of final remarks on Measure 86.
Well, I think you've raised excellent questions. I think I've had a fair shot at explaining what Measure 86 is. I hope you'll join us. I hope you'll give it due consideration. And I want to tell you how much I appreciate being invited back to the Gresham Chamber. It's you guys are great, and I've always felt very welcomed and respected here. And if there's any way in my capacity as state treasurer I can be of help to all of you, you'll let me know. Thanks very much for having me here.
Thank you, Treasurer Wheeler. And I, for one, would enjoy seeing slides of the North Pole and Everest trips. Okay. Please take a moment to fill out the evaluation forms that are on your table. It gives us an idea of topics and speakers for future programs. And also, the pens are courtesy of our friends at Riverview Community Bank, so you're welcome to take those as well. So on your tables are some important reminders. First of all, is the reminder for the Economic Summit that's coming up next, well, I didn't say next month, but actually just next week on October 2nd on Thursday. That'll be here at Persimmon, and you can register for that online at the Chamber website. And we encourage you to do that sooner rather than later. So that's the Economic Summit next week. Now, our government affairs programs, we are tag teaming with EME for these upcoming programs, and you'll see little tent reminders on your tables. We have a series of forums next month to feature our races for City Council in East County. On Thursday, October 9, we'll feature the candidates for Troutdale City Council, and that'll be at Fairview City Hall. That'll be a lunchtime meeting, 11:30 to 1 on Thursday, October 9. Wednesday, October 15, we'll feature the candidates for Fairview City Council. That'll also be at Fairview City Hall at 11:30. And then next month for our government affairs meeting, we'll be here Tuesday, October 28th, new time. We're going back to our lunchtime format, so 11:30 to 1, and then we'll feature the candidates for the Gresham City Council, and that will be right here at 11:30. And that will feature our candidates forums for election year 2014. So just be sure to take those reminders and join us for those meetings. Thank you for joining us this morning. Have a great rest of the week.